Welcome. Today, we're talking about statistical machine learning, the key concepts, and just as importantly, how to actually implement them for an audience that already knows how to write and ship production code. This is not another tutorial on calling .fit and .predict. It's the layer underneath that call, the statistical reasoning that determines whether the model you ship today is still trustworthy 6 months from now, after your users, your data, and your traffic have all quietly changed. By the end of this session, you'll have 5 concrete principles you can bring back to your own codebase, a working code pattern for calibrated predictions, and a clear picture of where this field is heading next. Let's get into it. Here's how most of us actually ship machine learning. Call.fit, call.predict, ship it. And that works, right up until the data shifts, the confidence scores turn out to be wrong, or a stakeholder asks the very reasonable question, how sure is the model, really? 3 things happen when we skip the statistics. Every model we train is, whether we think about it this way or not, a statistical estimator. Logistic regression, gradient boosting, deep nets, all of them are making an implicit claim about the process that generated our data. When we skip checking that claim, the assumptions don't disappear. They just resurface later in production as uncalibrated probabilities, drift nobody caught, or retraining that behaves unpredictably. So here's the core question this entire talk is really answering. Given a finite sample, how do we make provably reliable claims about the population we haven't seen? Every technique we cover today, from empirical risk minimization to conformal prediction at the end, is a different, increasingly sophisticated answer to that one question. Let's build one mental model that we'll refer back to for the rest of the talk. Every supervised model you've ever trained follows the same 5-stage chain, and naming each stage explicitly is what lets you diagnose failures instead of guessing at them. Stage 1. There's a true, unknown data-generating process, the real-world relationship between inputs and outputs that we never get to see directly. Stage 2, we get a training sample, a finite, noisy draw from that process, and it's genuinely all we have to work with. Stage 3, we choose a hypothesis space and a loss function, the family of models we're willing to consider, and the penalty for being wrong. Stage 4 is empirical risk minimization, the optimization we actually run, treating average loss on our sample as a stand-in for true risk on the whole population. And stage 5 is the model we end up with, along with a generalization gap that's governed by bias and variance, which is exactly what we're covering next. Here's the mental model to take away. Your job isn't to minimize training loss. It's to choose a hypothesis space and a regularization strength so that empirical risk stays a faithful proxy for true risk on data you haven't seen yet. That's a subtly different goal, and it changes how you think about every modeling decision that follows. This is probably the single most useful chart in applied machine learning, and most of us have seen its shape before without fully unpacking why it curves the way it does. Total generalization error decomposes into 3 additive pieces. Bias squared falls as model complexity increases, because a more flexible model can represent the true relationship more closely. Variance rises for the opposite reason. A more flexible model is more sensitive to the specific noise in your particular training sample. Retrain on a different sample and you'd get a meaningfully different model. Add those 2 curves together, plus a constant amount of irreducible noise, and you get that U shape you see on screen. The minimum of that U is the complexity you actually want, not the one with the lowest training error, which just keeps dropping as you add complexity. So what does this mean for your code? If you're in the underfit region on the left, the fix is to raise capacity, add features, reduce regularization. If you're in the overfit region on the right, the fix is the opposite. Add an L1 or L2 penalty, use early stopping, or get more data. And the sweet spot in the middle isn't something you eyeball from training loss. You find it with cross-validation, because bias and variance aren't directly observable from a single training run. Let's make this concrete with code. This is regularized logistic regression, trained on a held-out split, with an explicit calibration check. And these 3 details are exactly what most tutorials skip. Look at the function signature first. We're fitting an L2 regularized logistic regression with a configurable C parameter. That's our practical lever on the bias-variance curve we just looked at. Now, 3 annotations worth slowing down on. First, stratify equals y in the train test split. This keeps the class balance identical across the training and calibration data, critical for anything like a risk or fraud model where the positive class is rare. Get this wrong and your calibration step will be quietly biased. Second, and this is the detail almost everyone gets wrong the first time, CV equals prefit in the calibrated classifier CV call. This calibrates on data the base model never trained on, so the calibration isn't optimistic. If you calibrate on the same data you trained on, you'll get a calibration curve that looks great and lies to you. And third, the calibration method, isotonic versus Platt scaling, which is the sigmoid option. Isotonic is more flexible and needs more calibration data. Platt or sigmoid scaling is more constrained and works fine with smaller calibration sets. A rule of thumb is to prefer sigmoid below about 1,000 calibration examples. Here's why this matters in practice. If a business stakeholder asks, if the model says 80% risk, does that mean 8 out of 10 similar cases are actually risky? The honest answer before you calibrate is we don't know. This code is how you get to yes. Choosing a model family is itself a statistical trade-off, and it's rarely about accuracy alone. It's about which assumptions your production environment can actually tolerate. On the left, parametric models, logistic regression, generalized linear models, naive Bayes. They make a strong, explicit assumption about the functional form of the relationship. When that assumption roughly holds, you get strong interpretability. Coefficients map directly to effect size. Strong data efficiency, because the number of parameters is fixed. And very low latency, often sub-millisecond, because scoring is just a matrix multiply. On the right, non-parametric models. Gradient-boosted trees, random forests, k-nearest neighbors. Weaker assumptions, more flexibility to fit complex relationships, but you pay for it. You need more data, interpretability requires extra tooling like SHAP, and latency is higher because you're traversing an ensemble or computing distances at inference time. Neither column dominates the other. A common and reasonable pattern is to start with a parametric baseline for its speed and interpretability, and only justify moving to a non-parametric model with a documented, measured lift that's worth the added cost. Here's a question worth asking your own team. How would you actually know if your input data changed enough to hurt the model? Accuracy on a stale test set tells you nothing about tomorrow's traffic. You have to monitor the distributions your model is implicitly assuming are stable. There are 3 distinct kinds of drift, and they matter because they have very different and very differently expensive fixes. Covariate shift is when the input distribution changes, but the relationship between inputs and outputs stays the same. You catch this with a Kolmogorov-Smirnov test or the population stability index per feature, and the fix is often just reweighting samples or retraining on a more recent window. Label shift is when the base rate itself moves. Think seasonal fraud rates, while the underlying relationship holds. A chi-square test on label frequencies catches it, and the fix can be as simple as adjusting your decision threshold, no retraining required. Concept shift is the serious one. The relationship between inputs and outputs has genuinely changed, and the only real fix is a full retrain, because the thing the model learned is now stale. In practice, teams commonly use a PSI threshold above 0.25 on a top 10 feature as the line that pages an on-call ML engineer, because by the time accuracy visibly drops, the business impact has usually already landed. Let's ground this in a real, publicly documented example. Uber built an internal machine learning platform called Michelangelo, specifically to enforce statistical rigor at scale across hundreds of production models, not primarily to add features, but to make sure every model met the same statistical bar. 3 pieces of that platform map directly to what we've covered. A shared feature store guarantees that the exact same feature computation logic runs at training time and at serving time, which eliminates train-serve skew, a subtle but very common real-world cause of it worked in the notebook but fails in production. Standardized evaluation means every model, regardless of which team built it, gets scored against the same held-out and calibration protocol before it's allowed to ship. That's the calibration check from a few slides ago, enforced as a platform gate instead of an individual habit. And built-in drift monitoring operationalizes the statistical tests we just covered as continuous infrastructure, not a manual audit someone remembers to run. The broader lesson here, statistical rigor only scales when it's built into shared infrastructure. Asking every individual engineer to remember to calibrate and monitor their own models doesn't hold up once you have more than a handful of them in production. Let's close out the technical content with the idea at the frontier of this field right now. Traditional confidence intervals assume your model's errors are Gaussian, or at least well-behaved in some parametric sense. Conformal prediction drops that assumption entirely. Here's what makes it powerful. It wraps any point predictor, a neural net, a gradient-boosted tree, even a black box API you don't control internally, and produces a prediction set with a coverage guarantee, requiring only that your data be exchangeable. That's a substantially weaker requirement than what classical intervals demand. Look at the diagram. A single point estimate from your model gets wrapped in a conformal prediction set, calibrated on held-out data, and that set carries a mathematical guarantee. The probability that the true label falls inside it is at least 1 minus alpha, regardless of whether the underlying model itself is well-calibrated. This is the line that separates beginners from practitioners. Beginners report a single probability. Practitioners report a set that's guaranteed to contain the truth a known fraction of the time. And this is a real current production trend. Teams working on regulated or high-stakes decisions, credit, healthcare triage, fraud, are increasingly choosing conformal sets over raw softmax scores, precisely because that guarantee holds no matter how the model behaves. The Python library MAPI, built directly on Scikit-learn, lets a team add this to an existing pipeline in an afternoon, which is a big part of why adoption has moved faster than a lot of other advanced statistical techniques. Let's compress everything into 5 things you can act on this week. 1. Every model is an estimator. Treat bias and variance as first-class properties, not implementation details you ignore. 2. Calibrate before you trust probabilities. A 0.9 score should mean right 9 times out of 10, and you should verify that, not assume it. 3. Monitor distributions, not just accuracy. Accuracy is a lagging indicator. Drift in your inputs and your labels is the leading one. 4. Match model complexity to your data size, not to what's fashionable. The best model is the simplest one, whose bias-variance trade-off actually fits your sample. And 5. Prefer distribution-free guarantees, like conformal methods, whenever the stakes are high enough that a traditional confidence intervals assumptions aren't good enough. If you only do one thing after this talk, pick whichever of these 5 is currently missing from your team's model launch checklist and add it. If you want to go deeper, here's exactly where to start. For the theory behind bias variance and model selection, the Elements of Statistical Learning by Hastie, Tibshirani, and Friedman is the standard reference, and it's freely available as a PDF from the authors. For the Bayesian perspective underneath calibration, Christopher Bishop's Pattern Recognition and Machine Learning is the companion text. For the practical next step after today's conformal prediction slide, the Python library MAPI drops directly into an existing Scikit-learn pipeline. For the calibration code we walked through, the Scikit-learn documentation on probability calibration is the direct reference. And for field-tested, less theoretical, more practical engineering judgment, Google's Rules of Machine Learning is genuinely excellent. So, to close where we started, statistics is the discipline that turns machine learning from a black box into an engineering practice, one with the same rigor you already expect from every other system you ship. We covered the statistical learning framework, the bias-variance trade-off, a calibrated classifier you can drop straight into your own code, the trade-offs between model families, how to detect drift before it becomes an incident, a real platform that operationalizes all of it, and where the field is heading with conformal prediction. I'd love to hear what's on your mind. Questions on any of this, or specifically how it applies to whatever you're currently running in production.